Hi and welcome to this video. I'm doing a recorded video because I currently have bad internet and I don't want it to break off, and I think this is probably quite important. What we're going to talk about in this video is how to be succinct. Now, when you think of what it means to be succinct, you might think, oh, brief, we have to be brief, use few words. And then we get the issue of panicking. Oh my goodness, how can I be succinct? The topic is so big, it's so interesting. I do not want to shrink it down. Please don't make me shrink it down. I'd like to have 10 minutes, please. Some of you definitely will feel that way, and I think that's fantastic, because actually that shows that you're really, really interested in what you're doing. So your challenge is magnified by that aspect. So what I'm saying to you is that how do we create a presentation in 2 to 2.5 minutes long, right, to tackle some of the subjects that I've thrown at you, and without you getting lost and realizing which words do I cut? Which words do I cut? Which bits of do I cut the descriptions out? Do I make assumptions? How do I do it? Well, let's talk about it. So one of the absolute critical issues about being succinct is the difference between what you actually say explicitly, i.e. what you, as I'm doing now, you can hear my words, and what's carried underneath your words, and what's called implicit, right? And what does that actually mean? It's a really important distinction. So for example, if you came into the room and said, I'm angry, you just explicitly told me your state of mind. But if you came into the room and you said, the news has really, really irritated me, right? Almost the same number of words, almost the same time to say it. But in the second one, what's the difference between saying, I am irritated, and I'm using deliberately banal examples, right? What's the difference between saying that and saying, the news today talked about blah, 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 right? Whatever it was, okay? Or something like the news today talked about a depressing situation, for example, right? Now, okay, there are more words in the second one. But in the first one, when you just say something descriptive, I'm irritated, this is that is this, etc., you're not communicating, you're missing something out. You're missing out what's behind the irritation. And the problem is, it all comes down to what you choose to use and what's carried in your words. If you say you're irritated, it implies straight away there's something behind it. Okay? But if you have a short amount of time, it is always better to put the context into view. This is a really crucial view. Look at the second one. The second one explains a context. You saw the news today, and it was a really depressing situation. If you came in, let's find a better example. If you said, I'm depressed, and you walked into the room, right? You've used few words, it's brief, but you haven't really explained or made sense of your words to the person listening. But because you've got no context, the person listening has no understanding of what you're depressed about, right? The information is just there. But here, in this second example, you've presented the context. You've said, the news today talked about climate change affecting Antarctica, a really depressing story. There's a really depressing story in the news today about climate change. So straight away, you communicated much more. You've communicated the context, and then you've communicated that it's depressing. And it communicates more. I know there are more words here, but I am depressed. 2 seconds. The news was depressing today because it's about 10 seconds more. But in the second one, you have brought in the context, right? The situation. You've carried that into your communication. And that actually is a very powerful way. Now, just simply saying that to you won't necessarily make any sense, because you're still probably struggling with this idea, few words. I've got to have a few words when I'm trying to communicate. So the first first observation to be succinct then is that the actual words you use should carry as much of the context of what you're talking about, right? So I'm going to just linger on that, and then we're going to have a look at some clever techniques. One of the things that I've covered before as a speaking strategy is this pattern here. When you're trying to explain to an audience the development or the future development of, say, computing, or Ada Lovelace's contribution, or the West computers, or the greatest hardware invention, right? You might find yourself simply describing it. When you describe something, you often leave out the context, the why. The context is all about the why. You know, what does it mean? So what that there's this new technology? So this light is really not very good. So what that there is this idea and that idea? I want to have an answer to the question why. I want to see the context. For you, 90% of the context are usually problems or situations or some condition, right, in the world. And the thing, the technology, the idea, the concept is a response to that. So if you can put those two things in your sentence, then you can condense an absolutely stack load of information, tons and tons of information, without having to say too much. Now, you might say, hang on a second. So you're saying, give me the problem. Okay, so now I followed what you said. And so in my presentation, I'm going to spend 1 minute talking about the problem, then the other minute talking about the response. Okay, you could try it like that, and that might work. But don't make it so mechanical, because there are a couple of other tricks and strategies you can use. The context to explain the problem or the debate or the critical element, right? And what are they? Well, one of them is using concrete images. And another one is using analogies. When you're trying to communicate very abstract, perhaps very technical concepts, the temptation is always to say, okay, so I think that the future of computing, and then you start talking about technology, okay, and you go into the technology, you describe it, and it's all this kind of stuff. We don't have any context. We don't know why this technology came about. So you've already opened up your conversation and made it much too long. You should see your technology as the response to some set of problems. Carry that into your description of the technology. Carry that. So saying, so I want to say the future of computing is IP56. And the reason I think IP56 is the future is because the protocols it uses do this. But here again, I've got no context. Give me some context. Carry that into your explanation. So what would a context be? Well, the biggest challenge for network communication are these protocols. They create a limitation. What do I mean when they create a limitation? They do this, they do that. Now, how do you solve that limitation? How do you respond to it? Well, there's a possibility of a new type of technology, which some people are experimenting with, which does away with this and does this in this different way. So straight away in that type of explanation, you have carried the context into your description of the technology. And to help you even further, right, say that doesn't quite get you far enough. Another really, really good way of doing it is to use images. Now, let me ask you a simple question. Okay, who were your best teachers? Where are the places you learnt the most from? Either YouTube 3-minute videos, some documentary, maybe even a remark said in a film. So if anyone's seen the film Interstellar, for example, they had Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he was advising on it for the physics. And the director wanted to use an idea from black hole and relativity theory. It wasn't quantum theory. And there's a scene in the film where the ocean really slowly grows really high and the waves are huge. So what he did in the film was, in an image, capture a very abstract problem. If you read the reviews of Interstellar, for all his other problems, one thing it did in a very clever way was capture some very, very complex abstract ideas through film, through images, right? Now, why do you have to reserve that type of approach just for filmmakers? Why, when you speak and you're trying to communicate, can't you use images and analogies yourself? I have to teach you all object-oriented programming. Some of you will know it, some of you won't. It's quite an abstract and dry, potentially dry, and it'll put some of you off if I just start talking technical vocabulary. But if I cleverly use good images, then that your mind will hook onto those images and will grasp the very abstract concepts. So that's another really powerful way to communicate really, really complex, long ideas in very powerful, concrete images. So, if you want to talk about, say, network protocols and how data is passed around and bounced around, why not talk about the way that footballers in a team pass around the football and what the rules are? People can latch on to concrete physical images much easier than they can to abstract ideas. So in the process of working out how to be succinct and brief and know that you haven't got that much time, my point to you is not only carry the context, carry the problem inside your descriptions. So never allow yourself simply to describe something. Always carry the why, the context, inside the description of whatever it is. So if I'm teaching you object-oriented programming, it's a favorite example because students often stumble with it. Or if I'm teaching you Industry 4.0 or Internet of Things or algorithms, right? Here's my favorite one. Algorithms are a very, very important part of computing and learning what a computer is. But how would I explain what an algorithm is in one sentence? Think of a recipe for cooking. Anyone can think of a recipe. You all know what a recipe is, right? In half a sentence, I've managed to give you an image which is an analogy to an abstract concept of an algorithm. So there's nothing stopping you from doing that. So we have two elements here, and I'm going to draw this to an end, keep this quite brief for this particular thing. Encourage you to use images and analogies as much as possible. Avoid using jargon and the obligation to convince and persuade your audience that you're really clever and that you can use all the technical gobbledygook. No. Don't do that, right? Learn it yourself, but the power of your communication comes from your clever use of analogies and images, not from your use of jargon and abstract terminology, okay? If you're trying to communicate to me, let's take an example from last year, brain-computer interfaces, okay? Then you might actually, instead of brain-computer interfaces, want to talk about telepathy and mind communication and mind control. Now that's a crazy analogy, right, to BCI and brain-computer, but it's a very powerful image. It's a very vivid image that will help you carry some of the risks and some of the questions around BCI, for example. So if you want more suggestions, let's have more conversations in the drop-in. But in addition to it, also carry the context, the problem, the situation whenever you're forced to describe. So if you take on Industry 4.0 or the history of the West computers and so on, don't just describe what something was. Describe the context, the situation in which that thing came about. And in that way, you give it meaning. You make sense of it. It doesn't require, as my opening example showed, not a ton of difference in the amount of words you're using. So you can, with effort and with the clever use of these types of techniques, learn to make your work succinct, not just brief. You're not just cutting stuff out. You're cleverly making sure all your descriptions carry the context, right? And one element, and the other element is you're cleverly spending time to work out good analogies to communicate the more difficult and abstract ideas. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there. That's 15 minutes. That's quite dense, quite quick. And in the drop-ins, what I would recommend is that you take the material here and you come and ask me more questions about your own project if you feel it's important. And next week I will spend a little bit more time with this. Thank you all very much.